of you who might be new or different district previously, ATLAS is our term in Rutherford County for any students who are homeless. So instead of saying we have homeless students, we call them ATLAS students. So I am not the ATLAS contact this year. It's actually Miss Nadu, but she's in training. So I'm doing the training, but you are always welcome to contact me or Miss Nadu if you have questions or anything about ATLAS. So for things we're going to cover today, the definition of homelessness, what it means to be an unaccompanied homeless youth, ATLAS in general in Rutherford County, the purpose of McKinney-Vento, rights of homeless students, some specific things to high school, and then privacy regarding ATLAS status. Okay, so the definition of a homeless student is individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So when I use the term ATLAS or homeless, I don't necessarily mean someone who's literally living on the street or in shelter. Obviously, those students would be considered homeless, but homeless students come in kind of all shapes and forms. So fixed meaning it's subject to change at any minute. It's not a permanent place. Regular means they know they're going to go there after school every day and sleep there, and they have adequate accommodations for sleeping. They're not sleeping on the floor somewhere or that kind of thing. So adequate, regular, fixed. If they lack any of those three, then they could be considered homeless. So at the bottom, can a student go to the same place every night to sleep in a safe and sufficient space? So that's kind of what we ask ourselves when we're determining if a student might qualify to be homeless or not. So students can be considered homeless when they are sharing housing due to loss of housing or financial hardship. So we have a lot of students who their family is living with another family and they're not paying rent or sharing bills. They're living there because they had no other place to go, maybe they got evicted, maybe they couldn't afford their place anymore. So we would consider those doubled up families. They're not paying rent or they're not contributing to the bills, they're just living with another family. Obviously, students who live in motels, hotels, trailer parks, campgrounds, we have a handful of students every year who fall in that category. Of course, living in an emergency or transitional shelter. So, of course, we have families who have domestic violence happening in their home and maybe they're evacuated to a shelter. Those obviously would be considered homeless. Abandonment hospitals. I've never seen that happen before, but if it did, then they would also be considered homeless. So more homeless definitions, staying in a primary nighttime residence, that's a public place. So like if you're staying in, your family might be like sleeping in the bathroom at a playground, public playground. We've had students in situations like that before. So that while that is a shelter, it's obviously not a place that would normally be used for someone to live or spend the night. We have students who live in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, anything like that. And then, of course, migrant students living in any of the conditions that we've gone over so far. So what would not be considered homeless are some of these things. So again, we talked about doubling up with a family. If you're contributing to the family or to the income of the house, or if you're sharing bills, or if you are living with your grandparent because that's just the culture of your family, but you aren't in a financial hardship or you haven't lost your housing for some reason, those types of doubled up families would not be considered homeless. Same thing sort of with roommates. If you're sharing bills, if your mom and their friend live together because they both contribute to the rent, they both pay the bills, then those would not be considered homeless students. We have students every year, like mom is living with boyfriend. That's not a temporary place. Mom might not have her name on any of the bills, but that's where they live. Mom is living with boyfriend and the kids are with them. They're just living together because they're in a relationship. That is not considered homeless. And then if you have legal rights to live in a home, of course, that would not be considered homeless. So again, doubled up families have to have a loss of housing and they're dependent on the family that they're living with. And then McKinney-Vento doesn't place a time limit on homelessness, so you could be in that situation theoretically for all of your schooling, and you could still be considered homeless. So there's not a time limit. If you live with a family for up to 5 years, you're not homeless anymore. That's not a thing. So a large majority of our homeless students students, our Atlas students, would be considered unaccompanied. We had close to 90 Atlas students last year, and those were just people who were identified. I'm sure we have more than that in our building, but we had the most in the whole county, so we're the winners. If that gives you guys any idea of like the population and what our diverse culture looks like, we had the most Atlas students in the whole county. But lots of them were considered unaccompanied youth. We have a huge ESL population. We get new ESL students daily, and a lot of times they're coming here from their country, but not with their parent. They're living with a family member or a relative or friends of the family, so they're moving here. They don't necessarily they're not living on the street. They might have a bedroom, they might sleep in a bed, they might go to the same house every night, but they're without their custodial parent. The people they're living with don't have any sort of official guardianship or anything like that of them with them. So these types of students would be considered unaccompanied and fall under the Atlas category as well. So we often also have students who, once they turn 18, their parent like, sorry, I'm done, or whatever, and kicks them out. So those students, of course, would be unaccompanied because they're living without their parent, even if they're couch surfing and they have the same place and the parent says, yes, you can live here for the rest of your school year. We always have 18-year-old students who get kicked out, and not even 18-year-old students. Sometimes they're younger than that, but if they're not living with the person who has physical custody of them, they can fall under this unaccompanied youth and be considered homeless.
Here is a flow chart about unaccompanied youth eligibility from the National Center for Homeless Education. And as you look through it, you can see
I'm just kidding. This is just a flow chart. You guys would never need this. This is just something to help us clarify if we have questions. But it is good to, if you have a student in a situation, it's good to know when to report it and when not. So you guys see your kids every day or every other day at the very least. You have those relationships with them. Often they tell a teacher, my parent kicked me out, or often they tell you guys something that we don't necessarily know. So if you suspect somebody might be Atlas, or they said like, I got kicked out of my house last night, I'm living on the street, always report that. So there's different layers of support when students are identified as Atlas. So some of the things they might benefit from would be we can provide them with school supplies. So if they need anything for any of their classes, we can do that. They get free breakfast and lunch every day. If they needed transportation to school because they're living out of zone, we can set that up. Seniors, especially who are identified as Atlas, can receive a lot more financial aid on their FAFSA. If Ms. Cole and Ms. Tig, they identified several last year that weren't identified as Atlas, but when they went to fill out their FAFSA, we realized their situation was an Atlas situation, so we could identify them as Atlas, and then they received all full benefits of financial aid being an unaccompanied youth. So there's lots of reasons why you should tell if someone tells you that they're homeless or living elsewhere, but really the best interest of the student is to be identified as Atlas because they can receive all kinds of benefits from that. So who should you tell? So every school has an Atlas contact. It's typically a school counselor. Sometimes I've seen a graduation coach be the Atlas person. Here it's Ms. Nadu this year, but also me. So either one of us you could tell, shoot us an email, or come by our offices and let us know. And don't feel like you have to ask tons of questions of the student. If they are just having a conversation with you and it comes up that last night and the past month I've been staying with whoever, you don't have to get details. We can contact the student, and if we need more information, we can get more details, but if you suspect that they might be Atlas, go ahead and let one of us know. So the purpose of the McKinney-Vento Act requires states to eliminate enrollment barriers and provide school access and support for academic success for students experiencing homelessness. So basically, they can enroll in school even if they don't have all of their paperwork, and we can provide them with academic supports and other kinds of supports that they might not get if they weren't identified as McKinney-Vento. Enrollment in school is defined as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. So if we identify someone as Atlas who's trying to enroll, we have to enroll them immediately, even if they don't have all of their documentation. and if they've missed deadlines for things, which doesn't really apply to us so much, but basically once we identify someone as Atlas, we have to go ahead and enroll them regardless of if they have all the necessary documentation. So school selection is kind of a big deal when it comes to being identified as Atlas. Students who are identified as Atlas have two options. You can go to the school in which you're zoned, which means I live here, this house is zoned for Laverne High School, you can come here. Or if you've been identified as Atlas in the past and you move to, let's say, Riverdale zone, that student can choose to stay at their school of origin, which would be Laverne. So you can't just choose where you go to school, but you can choose to continue going to the school you've been at if you're identified as Atlas, or you can choose to go to the school in which you're zoned. I think we kind of went all over this already, but Atlas is identified every year. So every year at the beginning of the year, we have to re-identify all of our Atlas students. Parents fill out an Atlas questionnaire when they do their verification or their enrollment, so we flag some that way. Parents reach out to us a lot of times to say, hey, we're still in the same situation, so we can identify them that way. You guys are great about letting us know and identifying students, but we have to re-identify them every year. So just because someone was Atlas last year does not necessarily mean that they'll be Atlas this year. They can be, and there's a good possibility that they will be, but it's a year-to-year thing, so you have to be re-identified every year. And again, you can continue being here at your school of origin, or you can attend your new school that you're zoned for. So in determining a child's or youth's best interest, school districts must presume that keeping the homeless child or youth in the school of origin is the child's best interest, except when contrary to what the kid or the parent wants, or in the case of an unaccompanied youth. Also, with this, keeping them at their school of origin, yes, typically is the best, but if we have to set up special transportation because they now live in Rockville zone, sometimes those students sadly can be on a bus for like 2 hours each way in the morning and the afternoon, and sometimes that's not the best interest of the child for them to have to wake up at 4:30 to ride a bus for 2 hours there and get back home. Also with transportation, I requested transportation many times last year, and probably maybe 2 of them were actually fulfilled before like the end of the year or before that student ended up transferring to another school. So transportation, while it is an option, doesn't work out well at the central office sometimes. They take a really long time, and sometimes connecting buses here and here and here and here to get the student to the school doesn't work out. So while we can provide transportation, it's not always reliable, and it doesn't always happen in a timely manner. So the U.S. Department of Education has mandated that all homeless high school students receive information and individualized counseling regarding college selection, application process, financial aid. Luckily, here at Laverne, we have tons of people who do this, so no student goes without this counseling, but specifically for homeless students, we have to make sure, and our college advisors do a great job of identifying and talking through those situations with students, but it is, we have to do it legally, but we do it anyway, so that's good for us. Districts have to ensure that all homeless youth have the opportunities to meet academic achievement standards, receive credit in the classes that they're taking, and then again, we talked about the FAFSA, how if they're identified, they can possibly receive additional financial aid. One thing that you will see if you have an Atlas student in your classrooms is every quarter we have to send the central office a report of any of our Atlas students who have failed a class for the quarter and how that teacher is planning on remediating and helping them get their grade up to passing. We have so many students, as you can imagine, who are Atlas. If we have 90 students and they each have 8 teachers, I don't want to do the math because that's a lot, but I have to send out that many emails to that many teachers. Please don't get offended if I say, how are you going to help the student? That's just what we have to do. And I feel like teachers take that personally sometimes, like I'm not accusing you of not helping this Atlas student. That is not the case. We just literally have to do a report, so it's a copy and paste email to every teacher that that student has. So that is one thing that you might see after the end of every quarter if you have Atlas students in your class. Atlas status is protected by FERPA, so that is something that is confidential. If that student is in your classroom, we will notify you, but it's not, it's just to specific teachers, the counselor, and the AP of that student. So just keep that in mind, that it's not something that is shared with everybody, so please keep that information confidential if you have it. And that is their right and their privacy, so definitely abide by that. Here's some resources that were used to make this PowerPoint, but that's Atlas in an overall kind of way. Do you guys have any questions about anything?
So, kind of like in random conversation with students, something relating to this comes up, but it's not documented here. Is that, it's fine for us to reach out to you all?
Yes.
Okay.
That is definitely what we want you to do, and thank you for saying documented. If you have an Atlas student in their Skyward, the same place where you see that they're flagged for an IEP or a 504, ESL, they'll have an H up there, so you can see if they've been identified as homeless already. And if they haven't, then yes, please let us know. That way we can touch base with the student and see what their circumstances are and possibly identify them if we need to. Yes, but thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions? Okay, again, if you, did I turn this on? Oh, sorry. If you have questions, email me or